Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something he never expected. The moment you went silent, his world stopped. Not when you cried, not when you tried to explain, not when you begged for clarity. No. It was the moment you said nothing that hit him like a punch he never saw coming. Because your silence isn't emptiness, it's a message. It's the moment he realizes he didn't just lose your voice, he lost your access, your energy, your presence. And deep down, he knows he pushed away the one thing he can't replace. Now he's drowning in the quiet you left behind, and he can't escape it. Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment when your silence speaks louder than every word you ever said, a moment when the very person who once dismissed your worth begins to feel the weight of your absence, like a storm pressing against his chest. And it's not because you're being manipulative, cold, or calculated. It's because your silence is finally reflecting the truth he refused to acknowledge, that you were the one bringing depth, warmth, and meaning into the connection. And now that you're gone, he's left with the echo of everything he underestimated. When someone rejects you, whether subtly, directly, or through inconsistency, you often feel the urge to fight for clarity, for closure, for validation. You want answers. You want him to understand the hurt he caused. But here's the real power. When you remove yourself from the conversation, when you step back with grace and not anger, your silence becomes the mirror he never wanted to look into. Because silence isn't empty. Silence is full of the truth. You see, he expected you to keep showing up. He expected you to argue, to plead, to try harder. He expected you to defend your value as if it needed defending. But you didn't. You walked away without noise, without drama, without a last attempt to convince him of what he failed to see, and that's where everything shifted. That's where he suddenly felt the loss, because silence, real, confident, dignified silence, is proof that you don't need him to validate your worth anymore. It's easy to think that silence is weak, that it means you've given up or checked out emotionally. But silence is one of the strongest statements you can make, because it leaves him alone with his decisions. It forces him to confront the consequences of pushing you away. And consequences are uncomfortable. They demand reflection, they demand honesty, they demand awareness. This is why your silence is getting to him more than any message ever could. He begins to wonder why you're not reaching out anymore, why you stopped explaining yourself, why you stopped trying to fix things. At first, he may think you're just giving him space. But as time passes, the silence starts to feel different. It starts to make him uneasy. He begins replaying every moment in his mind, your kindness, your effort, your softness, your understanding. He begins to realize he took it all for granted. What he once saw as guaranteed suddenly feels fragile, distant, and out of reach. And that's when the panic sets in. Because the truth is, people don't miss you when you're gone. They miss you when they know they can't come back the same way. Your silence represents a boundary, a new standard, a shift in your energy that he didn't expect. And that shift forces him to acknowledge that the power is no longer in his hands. Your silence is killing him because it reveals something he didn't want to face. You were the one choosing him. You were the one investing. You were the one creating emotional safety. And now that you're silent, he realizes he's no longer being chosen. He realizes he's no longer the priority. He realizes that he is, for the first time, outside of your world, not at the center of it. And here's the part many people never understand. Silence isn't about making him jealous or desperate. It's about reclaiming your emotional space. When someone rejects you, they're essentially saying, "I don't see your value." Your silence answers, "That's okay. I'll take it back." Because the moment you stop explaining your worth is the moment you start embodying it. And when you embody your worth, you no longer chase anyone who can't appreciate it. This is why silence hits him so profoundly. It's not the absence of communication, it's the presence of self-respect. It's the quiet way you choose yourself again after someone has shown they don't know how to handle your heart. Silence communicates what words can't, that you are capable of walking away from anything that doesn't honor you. He may try to pretend that it doesn't affect him. He may try to act like he's fine, like your silence means nothing, but deep down he feels it. He feels the loss of your attention. He feels the absence of your care. He feels the void where your presence used to be. And the more he tries to brush it off, the louder that silence becomes. Silence makes him question his own choices. It makes him wonder if he misjudged you. It makes him rethink the narrative he created about you. Because now, without your voice filling the space, he has to confront the fact that he may have let go of something extraordinary. You didn't walk away to punish him. You walked away to protect yourself. And that distinction is important. Silence rooted in dignity rather than spite carries a different kind of weight. It shows emotional maturity. It shows strength. It shows that you're not interested in convincing anyone of your value. And that, ironically, is what makes your silence so haunting to him. Because value expressed through silence becomes undeniable. As days go by, he starts to feel something he never expected: confusion, then regret, then longing. Not because you did anything dramatic, but because you did nothing at all. He begins to see that your silence is a sign of finality, not a silent treatment. It's a sign that you've outgrown the situation, not that you're waiting for him to fix it. And that realization hits harder than any confrontation ever could. Your silence forces him to face the truth that you were the stable presence. You were the emotional anchor. You were the person who cared deeply and genuinely. And now he feels the lack of that care as a cold emptiness. You didn't need to shout. You didn't need to argue. You just stepped back, and the space you left behind says everything. People often think silence is passive, but silence is one of the most powerful moves you can make when it comes from strength. It allows you to heal without reopening wounds. It allows you to regain clarity without anyone else's influence. It allows you to rise without asking for permission. And through all of this, your silence becomes the greatest teacher, not just for him, but for yourself. Because you begin to realize that the person who rejected you was never rejecting your worth. They were rejecting their own capacity to meet it. And once you understand that, their rejection loses its power. You stop internalizing it. You stop carrying it. You stop allowing it to define how you show up in future relationships. Your silence is killing him because it's saying what your words never could, that you are no longer available to someone who couldn't see your value when he had you. It tells him that you're moving forward, not waiting backward. It tells him that you're choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over attachment. And that's when something remarkable begins to happen within you, something far more powerful than anything happening within him. Your silence becomes a declaration of growth. It becomes the space where you rediscover parts of yourself you once dimmed just to keep a connection alive. The more you stay silent, the more you realize that you're not actually losing anything. You're regaining everything you forgot you had. And while he is busy feeling the void you left behind, you're busy filling your own life with purpose again. Your silence carries a message he can't ignore, that your world never stopped because he walked away. It kept spinning, kept expanding, kept unfolding in ways he didn't expect. He imagined you would freeze in place, waiting for him to realize what he let slip through his fingers. But instead, you moved forward. You started pouring your energy into places where your love is appreciated, into people who don't treat your presence as optional. And nothing unsettles someone more than realizing the person they once dismissed is now thriving without them. The truth is, your silence doesn't just make him miss you. It makes him confront a version of himself he didn't want to see, a version that wasn't ready, a version that didn't show up, a version that now has to face the consequences of staying on the sidelines while you were giving your heart. And while he's busy wrestling with regret, you're learning to breathe again. Because silence has a way of reconnecting you with your own strength. You start to understand that your worth was never tied to someone else's ability to recognize it. You start remembering your power, your beauty, your emotional depth. You begin to see that the rejection wasn't an ending. It was a redirection, a shift back to your own center, a reminder that you deserve someone who actively chooses you, not someone who hesitates at the idea of loving you. What he didn't expect was how quickly your silence would shift the dynamic. When someone rejects you, they assume they hold the power. They assume their decision defines the connection. But when you respond with silence, not bitterness, not explanation, not pleading, You take all that power back. You reclaim control of your narrative. You make it clear that you're not waiting for someone who couldn't appreciate you the first time. And as your silence grows louder, he starts to feel something he never anticipated, the loss of influence. He no longer knows what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're planning. He no longer has access to the version of you who was emotionally available, who was willing to try, who was willing to invest. And that uncertainty begins to gnaw at him more than anything else. Because people fear the unknown, especially when they once had front row access to your heart. But your silence isn't about building fear or confusion. It's about building boundaries. It's about teaching yourself that you don't have to chase clarity from someone who couldn't offer it freely. You don't have to beg for reassurance from someone who withheld it. You don't have to fight for space in someone's life when you can create a life where you don't need anyone to validate your place. There's a certain elegance in stepping back without anger. A certain grace in choosing peace over confrontation. And that grace becomes the very thing he can't stop thinking about. He expected chaos. He expected emotional breakdowns. He expected arguments. But instead, you gave him silence. And silence is far more powerful than any dramatic response could ever be, because it shows self-mastery. Your silence pulls you out of the cycle of proving, explaining, and adjusting. It frees you from the exhausting loop of waiting for someone to meet you emotionally. It gives you room to grow into someone who doesn't settle for breadcrumbs, someone who demands reciprocity, someone who understands the value of her own heart. Meanwhile, he starts to experience the weight of what he lost in slow, agonizing moments. When he scrolls through old messages and realizes the conversations don't continue anymore, when he sees something that reminds him of you and reaches for his phone only to stop himself because he knows he no longer has the same access. When he hears your silence in places where your laughter used to fill the space. But the most haunting part for him is the realization that you're not silent because you're hurting. You're silent because you're healing. You're silent because you're growing. You're silent because you finally recognize that someone who rejects you doesn't determine your value. They reveal their own limitations. Your silence teaches him more than your words ever could. It teaches him that love isn't something to be taken lightly. It teaches him that not everyone will wait forever. It teaches him that emotional connection is a privilege, not a guarantee. And he begins to understand that the silence he's drowning in is the echo of every moment he didn't show up. But what you discover through your silence is even more transformative. You realize that the version of you who chased, who reached out, who tried to hold things together was acting from fear, not from strength. Fear of losing him, fear of being alone, fear of being misunderstood. But silence reveals a deeper truth. You're not afraid anymore. You're not afraid of walking away. You're not afraid of letting the wrong person leave. You're not afraid of starting again without him. And that confidence radiates in ways you don't even notice. It shifts your energy. It changes the way you carry yourself. It makes you more grounded, more self-assured, more aligned with who you truly are. And that transformation becomes magnetic, not just to him, but to everyone around you. Because when you choose silence, you choose yourself. And choosing yourself is the most attractive thing you can ever do. It sends a message to the world that you know your worth, that you're not afraid to stand alone temporarily if it means standing stronger later, that you refuse to negotiate your value for the sake of temporary connection. He begins to sense that your silence is not an invitation for him to come back. It's a signal that you've evolved beyond the version of yourself that tolerated emotional confusion. And that realization hits harder than the rejection ever did, because now he sees that the connection he once treated casually is something he can't replicate, something he can't replace, something he can't get back in the same form. Your silence becomes the moment he wakes up, while simultaneously becoming the moment you finally rise. It becomes the turning point where you stop being the one waiting and start being the one choosing. It becomes the line in the sand where your boundaries become non-negotiable. It becomes the quiet revolution that shifts your entire life forward. And while he struggles with the weight of his choices, you walk forward with a lighter heart. Not because you never cared, but because you learn to care about yourself more. You learn that silence isn't emptiness, it's power. You learn that rejection isn't the end. It's a redirection towards someone who won't make you question your value. you learned that stepping back is often the most courageous thing you can do when someone refuses to step forward. Your silence is killing him, not because it's designed to, but because it represents the one thing he never expected to lose, the version of you who was willing to give everything, even to someone who gave so little. And now he realizes that your silence isn't the absence of love, it's the presence of strength. And as your silence continues, something deeper begins to unfold, something he never anticipated. It's no longer just the quietness that unsettles him, it's the shift in energy he can feel but can't explain. He starts to sense the distance, the emotional withdrawal, the fact that you are no longer orbiting around him the way you once did. And that shift triggers something in him that no conversation ever could. It forces him to confront the reality that he is no longer the center of your attention, and that realization is more jarring than the silence itself. Because silence, when rooted in self-respect, becomes a signal that you have closed a chapter without asking for his permission. You are no longer reacting to him. You are no longer waiting for him to change his mind. You are no longer living in the emotional limbo he created. Instead, you're quietly rewriting your story without him as the main character, and he begins to feel that in ways he can't articulate. He starts to remember the way you used to show up, the way your presence brought comfort, excitement, stability, the way you made him feel seen even in moments when he didn't fully see you back. And now that those moments are gone, he can't escape the truth that your silence represents, that what he once took for granted is no longer available to him. He might try to distract himself. He might try to convince himself that he made the right choice. He might try to stay busy, bury himself in work, or surround himself with noise. But no amount of distraction can drown out the silence that lingers in the background of everything he does. It sits with him at night. It follows him in the quiet moments. It surfaces when he sees something that reminds him of you. And each time that silence grows heavier. But while he's wrestling with the quiet, you are learning to find peace in it. You begin to feel the weight lift from your shoulders, the emotional heaviness slowly dissolving. You realize that the silence isn't a punishment, it's a sanctuary. It's a place where you can heal without interference, where you can rebuild without judgment, where you can reconnect with yourself without being pulled back into someone else's uncertainty. Your silence becomes the soil where your confidence begins to regrow. It reminds you that your value isn't determined by who stays or who leaves, but by how firmly you stand in your worth. You begin to see your own strength not as something loud and forceful, but as something steady and unshakable. Something that doesn't need validation to exist. Start investing in yourself again. Your goals, your passions, your growth. You rediscover the joy of giving attention to your own life instead of pouring all your energy into trying to make someone see your value. You begin to realize that the love you were offering was never the problem. It was simply offered to someone who wasn't ready to receive it. And the more you grow, the more he feels the distance widening. Not because you're trying to hurt him, but because you're no longer holding on to something that was never secure to begin with. You're walking forward, and he's standing in the same place, staring into the silence you left behind. What he doesn't understand is that silence isn't cold. It's clarifying. It reveals intentions. It reveals priorities. It reveals emotional maturity. And through this silence, he begins to see that you weren't the one who wasn't enough. He was the one who wasn't prepared. You weren't the one who lacked effort. He was the one who lacked courage. You weren't the one who created confusion. He was the one who avoided clarity. Your silence becomes the contrast that exposes everything he didn't offer. And because silence removes the noise, it forces him to replay the moments you held his hand, the times you listened without judgment, the times you cared with your whole heart. Those memories don't fade, they sharpen. They become clearer with every day that passes. And in that clarity, he starts to recognize the depth of what he lost. But the beauty of this silence is that it also sharpens your perspective. You no longer see him through the lens of potential or hope or fantasy. You see him exactly as he is, someone who wasn't ready for the kind of love you bring. And that clarity sets you free. You begin to realize that you don't need someone to choose you, to validate the love you have within you. You don't need someone to return your effort to confirm your worth. You don't need someone to stay to prove that you are deserving. Those truths become self-evident the moment you stop trying to convince someone who couldn't meet you emotionally. And as your silence becomes your strength, he feels that strength even from a distance. He sees it in the way you no longer engage, the way you no longer react, the way you no longer seek attention or reassurance. He sees it in your absence, in your detachment, in your newfound sense of direction. And that shift shakes him, because deep down he always expected you to be there. But silence teaches him a lesson that words never could, that love does not wait forever, that effort is not infinite, that emotional availability is not something to take lightly. It teaches him that losing someone's presence is far more painful than losing an argument. It teaches him that silence can cut deeper than anger, because silence isn't fueled by emotion, it's fueled by clarity. And while he's learning these lessons, you're discovering something even more profound, that your silence is not just a response to his rejection, but a declaration of your evolution. It marks the moment you stop seeing yourself through the eyes of someone who couldn't value you and started seeing yourself through the eyes of someone who finally recognizes her own worth. You learn that the right person will never make you feel like you have to earn their love, their attention, their effort. The right person will never make you question whether you're enough. The right person will never reject you for being too deep, too emotional, too caring, too invested. The right person won't fear your heart, they'll cherish it. And though he may eventually come back with apologies, with clarity, with realizations, your silence will have already transformed you. You won't be waiting in the same emotional place he left you. You won't be holding on to the past. You won't be hoping for a different outcome. Because silence doesn't just create distance, it creates growth. It creates evolution. It creates a new version of you who is no longer willing to settle for emotional uncertainty. Your silence becomes the line he can't cross again in the same way. It becomes the boundary that protects your heart. It becomes the reminder that you deserve someone who doesn't need to lose you to appreciate you. And while he feels the sting of that truth, you feel something far more powerful, the realization that you are finally free.